The smell hit first at it slipped beneath the doorframe and crawled up the narrow hallway of the Brooklyn brownstone, thick, metallic, unmistakable. By the time Officer Rainey kicked in the door, the walls had already started to bleed. Blood, dark and half-dried, trailed in streaks along the tile floor like a roadmap to hell. They found her in the bathtub, what was left of her, anyway, that she'd been dismembered with clinical precision. Limbs sawn at the joints, torso wrapped in a blood-soaked sheet, head gone. Heavy-duty garbage bags, black, double-layered, were stacked in the corner like they were waiting for curbside pickup. The water had long since turned to a murky red stew, and the stink of it clung to their skin long after they left. Her name was Gianna Bellini. 61 years old. Beloved neighborhood matriarch. Widow. Mother of 2. And the primary suspect? Her son, Dominic Bellini. 39. Charismatic, calculating, untouchable. To the NYPD, he was a ghost wrapped in Armani. To his crew, he was a prince on the verge of becoming a king. And to the woman lying dead in that bathtub, he was her pride. Her protector. Her golden boy at least, until he wasn't. Dominic Bellini was born on a hot July night in 1983, in a cramped hospital room just off Atlantic Avenue. His mother, Gianna, was 20 and alone when she gave birth. His father, Salvatore Bellini, was already halfway to Sing Sing by the time the nurse placed Dom in her arms. They said Dom came out quiet. Not crying. Just watching. Like even then, he understood the world he'd been born into. The Bellinis were old Brooklyn. First-generation Sicilian immigrants who settled in Bensonhurst in the late 50s. The men worked construction by day and collected envelopes by night. The women cooked, cleaned, raised kids, and pretended not to see the blood on their husbands' cuffs. Gianna was different. Smart. Sharp-tongued. Pretty in the way that turned heads and started rumors. She'd been promised to a union man but fell for Sal Bellini instead, a made guy with a temper and a mean streak. By the time she realized her mistake, she was already pregnant. Sal went down on racketeering and assault charges before Dom learned to walk. That left Gianna to raise her son alone, in a world that didn't have much use for single mothers. But she didn't just raise him. She shaped him. Gianna taught Dom 2 things early: never cry, and never trust. She told him love was weakness, that respect mattered more than truth, and that nobody, not friends, not family, could ever know what you were really thinking. She dressed him in pressed slacks and polished shoes before he even hit grade school. Made him kiss her ring before bedtime. Called him her little king. By 12, he was running errands for his uncle's gambling ring. By 16, he had a burner phone, a .38 snub nose, and a reputation for making people disappear. He didn't want the street corner hustle. He wanted the throne. And he never lost sight of who put that hunger in him. It was Gianna who taught him how to spot a lie in someone's eyes. Gianna who whispered in his ear after every Sunday dinner about who was rising too fast, who was talking too loud, who might need reminding of where they stood. She wasn't just his mother. She was his consigliere, until she crossed a line even the mob couldn't ignore. Dominic didn't inherit the family business. He took it. The Vincenzo crime family had been bleeding for years: old leadership, petty beefs, too many rats. After the feds picked off half the capos in 2015, the whole organization was teetering like a dying empire. Dom saw his moment and moved with surgical force. No screaming, no guns in the street. Just a few accidents, some sudden retirements, and one very public execution at a cigar lounge in Bay Ridge that reminded everyone who the hell he was. By the time he turned 35, Dominic Bellini controlled the East Brooklyn rackets, loans, pills, guns, and a low-key sex trafficking pipeline that kept his pockets lined with federal-grade silence. He dressed like a Fortune 500 CEO and moved like a ghost. Politicians shook his hand. Detectives looked the other way. Rivals disappeared, but he never made a decision without checking with Gianna first. She wasn't involved in operations, not officially. But her word carried weight. People feared her more than most of the soldiers Dom employed. She had a memory like a steel trap and a sixth sense for bullshit. When Dom sat down with politicians or judges, she'd review the blackmail files the night before, circle names in red, tell him who could be leaned on and who needed to be destroyed. Their bond was fierce. In some ways, unnatural. Dom never married. Never had kids. Never even let a woman get close enough to stay the night. People talked, whispered about what might be going on behind closed doors in that brownstone. But no one said it out loud, because everyone knew, Gianna was off limits, until one night. She wasn't. It started with a slip. A soldier named Vince Catalano, a bottom feeder with a coke habit and a taste for gossip, was picking up cash from a midtown poker room when he caught a glimpse of Gianna Bellini. She was in the back seat of a black SUV, lip-locked with a man 20 years younger than her. Vince thought it was funny. Thought it was worth bringing up during drinks with his crew. Laughed as he told them the boss's mother was getting her back blown out by some mystery boy toy on Park Avenue. The next morning, Vince disappeared. Dom said nothing. No one asked questions, but the fuse had been lit, because what Vince saw was true. Gianna was having an affair. And not just with anyone, with someone Dominic would soon realize was a threat, not just to his pride, but to the entire empire he built. His name was Elijah Creed. 31. Smooth, educated, charming in a way that made women lean in and men instinctively reach for their wallets. He wasn't from the neighborhood. Didn't grow up around Coney Island shootouts or mobbed-up barbershops. He was Harlem-born, Columbia-educated, and fluent in 5 languages. On paper, he was a private art dealer. In practice, he was something else entirely. He met Gianna Bellini at a gallery in Tribeca, during a private showing of Sicilian oil paintings. She'd come alone, dressed in a black silk wrap and dripping with quiet wealth. Elijah was there on business, but when Gianna walked in, everything else faded. She had a presence, dangerous, elegant, unapologetic. He offered her a drink. She gave him a look that said, "If you want me, you'll work for it." They left together that night. What started as lust twisted quickly into something more. He made her feel young. Desired. Alive. And she gave him something no woman ever had before, access. Gianna started bringing him around in shadows. He'd meet her in hotel suites, private clubs, her brownstone on rare nights when Dom was out handling business. At first, Elijah didn't ask questions. But over time, things slipped, names, habits, routines. He was smart enough to connect dots. Smart enough to realize who she really was. Who her son really was. But instead of running, he leaned in, because Elijah wasn't just some pretty face with a talent for charm. He had his own secrets. And one of them was a file folder, thick, sealed, and labeled with the name Bellini, locked inside a safe at his East Harlem condo. To Gianna, Elijah was an escape. To Elijah, she was leverage. When Dom started noticing the lies, phone calls that didn't add up, closed doors, subtle shifts in her mood, he didn't react. He observed. Collected. Connected the dots. He followed her, watched from the curb as she stepped into that condo on 118th Street. Waited in silence as the lights turned on. As her silhouette crossed the window, followed by another, that was the moment the switch flipped. Something cold settled in Dom's chest, heavier than rage. This wasn't about sex. It was about betrayal, because Elijah Creed wasn't just sleeping with Gianna. He was feeding information to the feds, and Gianna, whether knowingly or not, had become the weapon aimed at her own son's heart. Dominic didn't scream. Didn't confront her. He didn't even mention the Harlem condo. He just kissed her cheek like always, poured her a glass of Barolo, and asked how her day had been. She told him it was fine. He smiled and told her she looked beautiful, and then he started planning her murder. It had to be quiet. No blood in the streets. No noise that could spook the feds or draw attention to the family's business. If Gianna had flipped, even unintentionally, Dom knew he had to erase every trace before it metastasized. He started with Elijah. 2 days after the Harlem stakeout, Dom had his tech guy clone Elijah's phone. Every text, every call, every breadcrumb, it was all his now. He saw the messages, the meeting spots, the vague references to leverage and evidence. Dom didn't need a confession. The puzzle was already complete. What burned him most wasn't the betrayal. It was who it came from. Gianna had always told him to kill with his head, never his heart. But now, the heart was screaming. And the head had no choice but to obey. He made no mention of it, even as he kissed her forehead goodnight. On April 1, 2023, he told Gianna they were having a quiet dinner at home. Just the two of them, like old times. He had a chef from Little Italy cater the meal, brought in fresh linens, lit candles. She smiled when she walked in. Said it felt like a holiday. He poured her a glass of wine, drugged it. She passed out in the middle of a story about Palermo, mid-sentence, mid-laugh, her hand resting gently on his. By the time she hit the floor, Dom had already laid out the tools. A plastic tarp, rope, bone saw, industrial-strength bleach. The bathtub had been scrubbed raw. The tile beneath her was wrapped in painter's plastic, sealed like a crime scene before the crime even began. Dom worked slowly. No emotion. Just breath and blade. He cut her body with the same precision she once praised him for. Her hands came first, because she'd touched him with them, then her tongue, because she'd used it to lie. By the time he was done, Gianna Bellini was gone. No bullet. No scream. Just a memory turned into meat, sealed in garbage bags, stacked neatly by the basement door. He didn't rush the cleanup. The blood was hers, but the silence belonged to him. The bags went out one by one. Not all at once. That would have drawn attention. Dom was too careful for that. Over the course of 3 nights, he made quiet trips to a closed-down meatpacking plant on the outskirts of Red Hook. A place the city forgot. No cameras. No workers. Just rusted hooks, old drains, and the smell of iron deep in the walls. The incinerator still worked. He fed her to the flames in pieces. Limbs first. Torso next. The head came last, but even fire doesn't burn everything. On the second night, a piece of her gold chain caught in the drain. He saw it glint under the red emergency light as he poured bleach over the blood. For a moment, he froze, something sharp and unfamiliar tugging at his chest. Regret. No fear, not of what he did, but of what it could cost him if he missed even one detail. He retrieved the chain, wrapped it in cloth, and dropped it in the harbor on his way home. Still, something didn't sit right. By April 3, Gianna's disappearance was official. Dom told her staff she'd flown to Naples for rest. Told the family she was visiting an old cousin. Told her housekeeper to take the week off. It might have worked, except for 2 things. First, Gianna missed a call with their attorney to approve a wire transfer. She never missed money. Never. Second, Elijah Creed vanished, not by Dom's hand, yet. He'd planned to deal with him after cleaning up the mess at home. But when Dom sent a soldier to the East Harlem condo, the place was already stripped clean. No art. No files. No Elijah, like he'd known what was coming. Which meant someone had warned him, which meant Dom had a leak, and leaks in the Mafia world don't drip. They explode. On the morning of April 4, NYPD Detective Alana Ruiz knocked on the Bellini door with a warrant in hand and 2 uniformed officers behind her. Said there'd been a tip. Said someone heard screaming days before. Said a woman matching Gianna's description hadn't used her phone, credit cards, or passport in 72 hours. Dom opened the door wearing a soft smile and a $2,000 suit, but in his chest, he could feel the fire coming back for him. Detective Alana Ruiz had never trusted Dominic Bellini. It wasn't personal. It was business. In a city like New York, you didn't trust men who played both sides, politicians, cops, criminals, businessmen, especially when they all wore the same suit. She knew his type well. Smooth, calculated, never a hair out of place. A man who lived with power in his veins, a man who could take whatever he wanted and leave no trace behind. But Alana knew something about Dominic that few others did, something she never told anyone. When she was 14, she used to hang out in the Bellini neighborhood. Her father, a detective in the same precinct, would work late hours, leaving her to wander the streets with her friends. It was 1997, and Brooklyn was still gritty, dangerous in its own romanticized way. One night, she ended up at a local diner, sitting in a booth across from Gianna Bellini. Her father's name had come up in conversation. A polite exchange, nothing too personal, but for the first time in Alana's life, she realized who Gianna was. The Mafia matriarch. And what that meant. Alana could feel the walls closing in on her in that quiet moment. Gianna never flinched. Never hesitated. She simply smiled and handed Alana the best piece of cannoli she'd ever tasted, but that smile stayed with her. That smile was the reason Alana could never forget how quickly the Bellinis rose, and how many people had disappeared along the way. Alana joined the force with one thing in mind, to clean up the mess the Bellinis had made. Her father's unsolved cases sat like an open wound in the family's history, and she carried that anger in her blood. It wasn't just about her father's death. It was about the ones who had been lost to the underworld. The ones who never got justice. Now, a year after she was assigned to the homicide division, the Bellinis were back in her sights. Gianna's disappearance was a whisper, a rumor, until she started digging. And the deeper she dug, the clearer it became that the Mafia's hold on Brooklyn wasn't just blood, it was iron. The moment Ruiz knocked on that brownstone door, she knew she wasn't getting answers. She could see it in Dominic's eyes, cold, unreadable. Like a man who had been through this dance before. "Detective," he said, his smile tight but polite. "Can I help you?" She didn't waste time. "I'm here about your mother. She's gone missing. We need to ask a few questions." Gianna's disappearance was the tip of the iceberg. But Alana knew that under the surface, something far darker was lurking. She wasn't sure if Dom had killed her, or if he'd set it up to look like it. But the moment he opened that door, Alana felt like she was stepping into a world she might not be able to escape from. Dom didn't flinch when she asked about the last time he saw Gianna. He simply said, "She's been traveling. That's all I know." He gave her nothing. Nothing she couldn't already guess, but Alana wasn't stupid. The truth was, she knew Dom better than anyone. She knew that under that polished exterior, beneath the well-tailored suit, there was something more, something dangerous, and if she didn't uncover the truth soon, that something was going to bury them all. Alana Ruiz didn't need much to get started. The Bellini name was like a badge of shame in the precinct. Officers knew the rumors, how the family's ties ran deeper than a simple neighborhood racket. When Alana asked around, every single cop she spoke to had either been paid off or looked the other way. But even the most loyal of men couldn't stay silent forever. Sooner or later, someone would crack, and that's how Alana found herself in a dimly lit back office at a pawn shop on Roosevelt Avenue, staring down a sweaty, nervous man named Tony Fingers Lacasio. He was a small-time hustler who owed a lot of money to Dom's crew. He'd been caught trying to sell stolen goods and had no choice but to talk when the right people came knocking. "Gianna Bellini," Alana said, pushing the photo across the table. "When's the last time you saw her?" Tony swallowed hard, his hands shaking. I don't know nothing about her, detective." "You're barking up the wrong tree." Alana didn't move. She didn't need to. She'd seen men like him crumble under pressure. Slowly, Tony leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, I heard things. People talk, all right. Gianna, she wasn't just a mafia queen, you know. She was into things, files, information, things that could bring down a lot of people if they got out. That's why she disappeared." Alana's pulse quickened. "You're saying she was a liability?" Tony glanced around the room, making sure no one could hear. "She was playing both sides. And you don't do that with Dom. You just don't." That was the first crack. And it came from the least likely source, Tony Fingers, who had nothing left but the truth. Alana's instincts kicked in. She left the pawn shop with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: Gianna had something dangerous, and Dom Bellini was terrified of it being exposed. The next step was simple: go after the people who knew her best. Her friends. Her connections. If Gianna had been flipping sides, it wasn't just her son who would have known. It would have been anyone close to her. Later that night, Dominic Bellini was staring out his window on the 12th floor of his luxury penthouse when he saw the lights flashing in his rearview mirror. He knew instantly, the storm was coming. Detective Ruiz was getting too close that he hadn't counted on her. She was clever, persistent, and worst of all, she wasn't afraid of him. For the first time in years, Dominic felt his grip loosen. He'd taken every precaution. He'd wiped everything down. But someone, had talked. His phone buzzed with a message from his underboss, Frank, the Hammer, Del Vecchio. Detective Ruiz is poking around. We have a problem. That was an understatement. Dominic had dealt with rats before. But Alana Ruiz wasn't just a cop. She had a history with the family, and she had a personal vendetta against him. She wanted him to burn. By April 5th, the game was in full swing. Dom made a call to his lawyer, then another to his most trusted man, Salvatore, Sal, Ruggiero, a former hitman turned fixer. Sal had always been his shadow, the one person who could handle problems quietly. Dom needed something more than silence. He needed to make Ruiz disappear, figuratively. The kind of move that would make the police back off without raising suspicion. Sal was already moving behind the scenes, calling in favors, setting up the right people, but what Sal didn't know was that Dom was ready to make a mistake. One too big to cover up. Meanwhile, Alana was at her desk, poring over files, cross-referencing everything she'd gathered from Tony and her other sources. Gianna had been involved in something deeper, something more than just an affair. But what? Then she found it. The missing piece. A set of encrypted files in Gianna's digital locker. Files that no one in the family had known about. Files with names, locations, contracts, and among the names, Dominic Bellini. A cold shiver ran down Alana's spine. Gianna had been playing both sides, but more than that, she'd been collecting evidence. The evidence that could bring down everything. That night, Alana made her move. She sent a team to tap into the encrypted files. They were all set to break through the digital lock by the morning, but as she left the precinct, the feeling that something was wrong gnawed at her gut. She'd exposed the first crack in Dom's world. But in doing so, she had just stepped into the spider's web. The night felt colder than usual. Dominic Bellini stood on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out over the skyline. The lights of the city flickered like stars on a clear night, but to him, they might as well have been warning signals flashing. Every decision he had made, every person he'd trusted, everything he'd fought for, it all seemed to come down to this. Alana Ruiz was getting too close. He'd known the risks when he got into this game. The Mafia life was built on trust, and trust was a fragile thing. But for someone like Dom, someone who had lived through the hell of betrayal, there were only two options: destroy or be destroyed. And now, Alana had found something. Something Gianna had left behind, something that connected the dots. Dom's phone buzzed. It was Sal. She's still pushing. They're breaking the encryption tonight. We need to move fast. Dom didn't need to hear more. He knew what needed to be done. He picked up the phone again, dialing a number that had never failed him. A cold, calm voice answered. It's time, Dom said simply. He hung up. Alana Ruiz had no idea how close she was to the edge. She'd dug deep, thought she was about to uncover the truth, but there was no truth in this world. Not anymore. There was only power, and power never let go without a fight. Alana sat in her car outside the Bellini brownstone. Her phone screen glowed in the dark. Her team was making progress on the encryption, but they were still a few hours away from unlocking the files. She could feel the weight of it in her gut. Something was about to break wide open. She had to keep the pressure on. Then, her phone buzzed again. A text from her superior. They're on the move. Bellini's people are clearing out assets. Be careful. Alana's heart raced. They were making their play. She had no choice but to keep pushing. She stepped out of the car, moving with the confidence of someone who'd spent their whole career studying people like Dom Bellini. But what she didn't know was that Dom had already accounted for this. The meeting had been set up. By the time Alana and her team reached the dockyard where they'd planned to meet their informant, the scene was already set. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from a single, flickering bulb hanging above the loading dock. The air smelled of salt and rust. Alana was never one to wait around. She entered the warehouse, her gun drawn, her partner close behind her. They heard footsteps. Low, deliberate. Alana tensed. But what she didn't see, what she didn't hear, was the second presence, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. As she moved forward, a loud crack echoed through the warehouse. A gunshot rang out. Alana stumbled, feeling the searing heat as the bullet grazed her shoulder. She cursed under her breath, immediately diving behind a stack of crates. A familiar voice called out, calm and measured. "You always were a step behind, detective." Dom's figure emerged from the shadows. His suit was pristine, his expression a perfect mask of control. "You don't get it, do you, Alana? You think you're uncovering something, but there's nothing here. This life doesn't leave traces. And people like me, people who control everything, don't get caught." She grit her teeth, clutching her shoulder. "You're wrong. I have the files. I know what you've done. You can't escape this time." Dom's eyes gleamed. "You think that matters? You're here, in my world now. And you're not going anywhere." Before Alana could react, a sharp crack of another shot rang out, hitting the wall beside her. She ducked, instinctively reaching for her radio to call for backup. But as she moved, she realized there was no sound, no movement from her partner. They were alone. Dom took a slow step forward. Gianna was a liability. She was never supposed to know what she did. She was weak. "You made her weak," Alana spat back, her voice strained. "You used her. You used everyone." He didn't flinch. "No. I built them all. And I'll burn it all to the ground before I let anyone destroy what I've built. Especially you." His hand went to his coat pocket, pulling out a small vial filled with a pale substance. He tossed it casually to the floor in front of Alana, the liquid spreading rapidly. Alana recognized it immediately. "Acid," she whispered, her eyes widening in realization. Dom smiled coldly. "You wanted the truth. Here it is. I burned every piece of evidence that would have brought me down. I made sure of it. But you won't make it out alive." He moved closer, his voice a low whisper, just as the acid began to eat away at the floor, the walls, and the very air itself. "You were too late, detective. And now, it's over." The morning after, the docks were quiet. No sign of the detective. No sign of Dom's enemies. Just the faint scent of burned metal and the murky waters below. And in the aftermath, Dominic Bellini stood alone in his penthouse, watching the city through the glass. The files were gone. The detective was gone. His empire was secure, and for a moment, he thought about Gianna, what she'd done, and what she had become. In the end, it didn't matter. They were all just pawns in his game. And when you're at the top, there's no one left to play against but yourself. But even as he smiled, something gnawed at him. A faint whisper at the back of his mind. A crack in the foundation that had always been there, quietly waiting to break. With that, the endgame was in motion, and everything Dom had built, everything he thought he controlled, was just a step away from crumbling. It had been 3 weeks since Detective Alana Ruiz disappeared. The city moved on, as it always did. The Bellinis were still at the top, their businesses operating with the same cold efficiency. Dom had put the pieces back together. His power was unchallenged, his family still intact. He thought he had won. But deep down, he knew better. No one ever truly escapes their past, not when it's soaked in blood. It was a late evening when he first heard the knock, not a loud, forceful knock, just a subtle, deliberate series of taps. It came from the front door of his penthouse. He wasn't expecting anyone, and that instinct, the one that had kept him alive for so long, flared up. He didn't answer immediately. Dom took a moment, walking across the marble floors in silence, his thoughts heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Alana was gone. But the files, the evidence, had never truly disappeared. Somewhere, deep in the city's underbelly, there was a fragment of truth left behind. And whoever had it was coming for him, that he knew who it was even before he opened the door. Standing there was a familiar face. Not Alana. Not a cop. But a man who had been his closest confidant. The one person who knew every secret, every move. Frank, the Hammer, Del Vecchio. Frank, Dom said coldly. What the hell are you doing here? Frank didn't say anything at first. He stood there, looking almost defeated. His broad frame was slumped, and his face was hard to read. Something wasn't right. You gotta listen to me, Dom, Frank muttered, his voice shaking. It's all falling apart. Dom's chest tightened. What are you talking about? I didn't want this. But I couldn't stop it. The feds, they got everything. They've been following us for months. Dom's heart skipped a beat. How the hell do you know this? They've got the files. They're on to us, Dom. Alana wasn't just one cop. She had the whole department behind her. Dom's mind raced. His pulse quickened. He moved toward Frank, grabbing him by the collar. Who else knows? Who the fuck else knows about the files? Frank stepped back, his eyes darting to the side. I didn't think they'd get this far, Dom. I thought we could. Dom's hand shot out, gripping Frank's throat. Who? The lawyer. The one you trusted to handle the offshore accounts, Frank gasped, struggling to breathe. In that instant, Dom knew. The only person who could have tipped off the authorities about the files, who could have given them everything they needed to bring him down, was someone he had trusted with his empire. You let them in, Dom said, the words barely above a whisper. Frank's face contorted in pain, but he nodded. I didn't have a choice, Dom. The pressure, it's too much. They said they'd burn the whole family down if I didn't. Dom let go, pushing Frank roughly against the wall. You've made your choice, Frank. Now you're going to live with it. That night, Dom gathered his men. Frank had spilled the beans, but he wasn't the only one who had been compromised. The lawyer, one of his oldest allies, had been working with the feds for months. The whole empire was unraveling. The Bellinis had never been untouchable. But Dom had believed they were, until now. The man who had lived his life in control, who had crushed his enemies without mercy, now found himself at the mercy of his own people. The feds were closing in. His men were turning on each other. And worse, his own flesh and blood, the ones he trusted the most, were no longer loyal. He called a final meeting, summoning those who were still loyal to him. They gathered in the shadows of an old warehouse, the same place where he had started his rise to power. It was fitting, he thought, this was where it would all end. What's the plan? One of his men asked, his voice filled with doubt. Dom stood at the front of the group, staring at the faces that had once been so sure. There is no plan. We fight. We kill anyone who gets in our way. We burn everything down. But even as he said it, Dom knew. It wasn't enough. The system he had built was too weak. The truth always found a way to break through. And when it did, there was no escaping it. The police were already outside. The sirens could be heard in the distance. Dom's men scrambled, trying to decide which way to run, but it was too late. Dominic Bellini, the king of Brooklyn, stood alone as the weight of everything he had built came crashing down. By dawn, the Bellini empire was no more. The FBI had raided every last one of his properties. His closest men were either dead or in custody. The lawyer had been found in a car, shot in the head, his body left in the middle of the street. Frank, the Hammer, Del Vecchio had been taken into protective custody, but it was clear that his fate was sealed. Dom had nothing left, his penthouse was empty. His empire was ashes. The family that had been his strength was now scattered, broken. He had no allies, no safe house to run to. The files Alana had discovered were out in the open, and there was no way to deny it anymore. He was done. They found him 3 days later, hiding in the basement of one of his old properties. Dominic Bellini was dead. His body was found slumped against the wall, a gunshot wound to the head. His empire, his family, and his life, all were gone, but in the end, there was something fitting about it. because even the greatest of kings eventually fall. And when they do, all that's left is the echo of their silence, and that concludes the story of Dominic Bellini, an empire built on blood, power, and lies. A man who thought he could control everything, only to realize in the end that no one escapes the truth. If you were captivated by the rise and fall of Dominic Bellini, a man who ruled with fear and deception, then you know that no empire, no matter how powerful, lasts forever. The truth always finds a way to the surface, and when it does, the consequences are inevitable. But what do you think? Was there anyone who could have stopped Dom before it was too late? Or did he seal his fate the moment he crossed the line? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories that reveal the darkest corners of the human experience. And if you have a case that you think is even more chilling than this one, share it with us in the comments below. Until next time, stay sharp, and remember. Sometimes, the truth is far scarier than any fiction.